At my reunion dinner, my mother, Eleanor, looked me dead in the eye and said to my father, "She was never a daughter, Sterling. She was a liability that needed to be settled." My glass of wine was poisoned, but they made one mistake. You can't just liquidate a CIA officer. They didn't end a problem. They summoned a war. My name is Paige Blake. I'm 29 years old, and for the first time in over a decade, I was coming home. The rental car moved silently through the tree-lined streets of Atherton, California, a zip code that smelled of old money and neatly trimmed secrets. I'd landed at SFO an hour ago, the California sun feeling alien on my skin. Here, multi-million-dollar mansions hid behind imposing wrought iron gates, veiled from the eyes of the unworthy. The Vance estate was the grandest of them all, a cold fortress of stone and glass that had been my childhood prison. The chill of the marble foyer hit me first. Then I saw Mrs. Gable, our housekeeper, the only person who had ever shown me kindness here, slipping me a secret Hershey's bar when I was a child. Her eyes met mine, wide with a worry she couldn't voice, before she gave a frantic, almost imperceptible shake of her head and bowed. It was a clear warning. Before I could react, my mother, Eleanor, appeared. She was a vision in a cream-colored Loro Piana dress, her posture perfect. The scent of her Creed perfume was an invisible wall as she placed her hands on my shoulders in a gesture that only looked like a hug. It was a sterile, practiced performance. "Paige," she said, her voice smooth as glass. She pulled back, her eyes doing a swift, critical inventory. "You look hardened. There's something wild about you." A beat of silence. Not like us. It wasn't a welcome, it was a final judgment. Dinner was served at a long mahogany table, its surface gleaming under the cold light of a baccarat crystal chandelier. The meal was an exercise in obscene luxury. Perfectly seared Kobe beef, delicate asparagus, and a wine that cost more than my first car. My father, Sterling Vance, the CEO of Vance Defense, spoke of a new multi-billion-dollar contract with the Pentagon. My brother, Julian, though absent, was the evening's star, his latest triumph in a Silicon Valley tech firm, praised with paternal pride. I was a footnote. "And you, Paige?" my father finally asked, his gaze not quite meeting mine. "Still happy with your administrative work?" "It's fulfilling," I said, the lie tasting like ash. Eleanor gave a small, condescending laugh. "Well, at least it keeps you busy. A quiet existence for her is the best we could hope for, isn't it, darling?" "Stability is paramount," my father stated, his tone flat. "You understand, Paige." Oh, I understood. I was the instability that needed to be managed. Eleanor even had the audacity to discuss her latest philanthropic venture, a charity for displaced children. The hypocrisy was so profound, it was almost admirable. Then came the wine. Eleanor lifted a bottle of 2014 Opus One, a wine whose price could feed a family for a month. She poured a generous amount into my glass, the deep red liquid swirling like a dark promise. "Drink, dear," she said, her smile perfectly placed. "To your return." My training, forged in the unforgiving crucible of the farm, screamed. Every instinct was on high alert. I raised the glass, taking a small, evaluative sip, just enough to taste. One sip was more than enough. The faint but unmistakable metallic tang, followed by a slow, creeping heat in my throat. It was a signature I had been trained to recognize. A sophisticated, slow-acting cocktail designed to induce cardiac arrest, a death that would look tragically natural. My blood ran cold. My eyes snapped to my mother. She was still smiling, a placid, serene expression that never reached the Arctic chill of her eyes. She knew. The world began to tilt. My vision blurred, the brilliant chandelier fracturing into 1,000 splintered lights. The opulent dining room swayed, and my parents' voices became distorted, as if I were hearing them from underwater. But I heard the words. I heard every single one. Eleanor's voice, stripped of all pretense, was as cold and sharp as a shard of ice. She was never a daughter, Sterling. She was a liability, a rounding error in our legacy. Her tone was flat, transactional, like discussing a bad investment. And it's time to write her off. My father said nothing. His silence was a roar. It was his signature on my death warrant. They weren't just disowning me, they were liquidating an asset. My body gave out. I slumped forward, my arm knocking over the wineglass. The Opus 1, red as blood, spilled across the white linen, a violent stain on a perfect canvas. The last image seared into my mind was of my mother, a serene smile on her face as she slowly, deliberately, pulled on a pair of long white satin gloves. She was ready to clean up the mess that was me. But as darkness consumed me, a different voice echoed in the collapsing corridors of my mind. It was the voice of my instructors at Langley, hammered into my soul. Threat assessment, neutralize environment, survive, counterattack. They thought this was the end. They thought they could simply write me off. They were wrong. This was the beginning. In the encroaching darkness, my mind drifted. The poison pulled me under, but instead of oblivion, it dragged me back through my own personal museum of scars. Each exhibit a testament to a long and carefully documented betrayal. The first memory to surface was from when I was 14. It smelled of soldering flux and motor oil. I had won first place at the state science fair. My project, an autonomous robotic arm I had built from scratch, had been my entire world for months. I'd spent sleepless nights in the garage, my hands covered in grease and small burns from the soldering iron, my mind electric with purpose. I came home that day, clutching the heavy gold-plated trophy, my heart pounding with a childish excitement I hadn't yet learned to suppress. I found my mother in the living room arranging flowers. She glanced at the trophy, then at my grease-stained jeans, and her perfectly sculpted lips tightened in distaste. "Paige," she said, her voice dripping with disappointment. "A Vance girl shouldn't be messing with filthy machinery. You look unkempt." That night, there was a celebration dinner at the country club. Not for me. It was for Julian, who had just made the varsity tennis team. My trophy was quietly placed on a bottom shelf in my father's vast library, behind a collection of leather-bound encyclopedias. Within a week, it was gathering dust, a forgotten monument to an achievement that didn't fit the family narrative. I learned a valuable lesson. My victories were my own, to be experienced in silence. The darkness swirled, and another memory took its place. I was 15. The night air was cold, smelling of rain and the acrid scent of burnt rubber. Julian, drunk and reckless behind the wheel of his brand-new BMW, had crashed into another car, causing a minor injury to the other driver. I was in the passenger seat, the only witness. My father arrived before the police, his face a mask of controlled fury. He didn't check on the other driver. He pulled me aside, his grip on my arm like a vice. "You'll say you were driving," he hissed, his voice low and urgent. "You're a minor. It will be a slap on the wrist. Julian's record must remain clean. He can't have this." Something inside me snapped. "No," I said, the word feeling foreign and powerful. "I won't." He stared at me, his eyes filled with a cold, hard hatred I had never seen before. Your stubbornness, he seethed, will be the ruin of this family. He wasn't talking about the accident, he was talking about me. I wasn't ruining the family, I was just refusing to be another one of its lies. That night, I became an adversary. The final exhibit in the museum was the most painful. I was 16. It was the straw that didn't just break the camel's back, it annihilated it. Julian, facing a failing grade in his AP English class, stole an essay from my computer and submitted it as his own. When the teacher, who recognized my writing style, discovered the plagiarism, Julian didn't confess. He claimed I had framed him out of jealousy, that I had hacked his email and submitted it myself to get him in trouble. Eleanor believed him without a moment's hesitation. She confronted me in my bedroom, her body trembling with a rage that was terrifying to behold. "You are a viper in this house," she screamed, her voice shaking. "You are consumed with envy for your brother." Then she did something I would never forget. She grabbed my birth certificate from my desk drawer, held it in front of my face, and ripped it in two. The sound of tearing paper was louder than her screaming. "I wish you had never been born," she shrieked, the pieces fluttering to the floor like dead leaves. My father stood in the doorway, a silent spectator to my execution. When my mother's tirade subsided, he spoke a single quiet sentence. "Go, before you do any more damage." That was it. No trial, no defense. I was found guilty. I packed a single duffel bag that night and walked out of the house, the torn pieces of my identity still scattered on the carpet. I was invisible, a ghost in my own home, and now I was being exorcised. As I walked down the long, winding driveway toward the cold iron gates, a soft, wrinkled hand grabbed my arm. It was Mrs. Gable. In the faint glow of the porch light, I could see tears streaming down her cheeks. She pressed a small roll of cash and a hastily made sandwich into my hand. "Go, little one," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Go and make a life for yourself, a real life. This place, it doesn't deserve you." It was the only act of kindness I received that night, a tiny flickering candle in the blizzard of betrayal. For years, the memory of her warm hand was the only thing that kept me from believing I was truly and completely worthless. It was my proof that I had, at one point, existed. A sudden, sharp gasp for air brought me back to the present. The smell of damp earth and mold filled my nostrils. I wasn't in the dining room anymore. I was in the wine cellar. My CIA training kicked in instantly, a reflex overriding the fog of the drug. Assess, orient, decide, act. I did a quick mental and physical inventory. No obvious injuries, but my limbs felt heavy, my thoughts sluggish. No weapons, no communication devices. They had stripped me clean. They had dragged my unconscious body down here, planning to stage what? A disappearance? An accident? They had left me for dead. But then I saw it. On a small, dusty wooden crate beside me sat a single butterfly-shaped hair clip. My hair clip. They must have removed it while moving me. A detail, a mistake, a fatal one. They were sloppy. They were arrogant. They thought they had disposed of a family problem, a difficult daughter who had outlived her usefulness. A cold, sharp clarity cut through the last remnants of the drug. I looked around the dark, damp cellar at the racks of priceless wine, standing silent sentinel. I thought of the girl who won the science fair, the girl who refused to lie, the girl who was cast out into the night with nothing but a duffel bag. And I had to ask myself, did they really think I was still that 16-year-old girl? Did they forget what kind of world they threw me into? They had thrown me into the world, and the world had not been kind. After leaving Atherton with the few $100s Mrs. Gable had given me, I fled to the sprawling, anonymous concrete jungle of Los Angeles. I learned the hard way that survival has a steep price. My first few weeks were a blur of sleeping on park benches in MacArthur Park and checking into squalid motels that smelled of damp desperation. I learned the sharp, gnawing ache of real hunger, a feeling utterly alien to the girl who grew up with catered meals. I took any job that would have me. I washed dishes in a sweltering Mexican restaurant in Boyle Heights, my hands raw and blistered. I cleaned toilets at a movie studio in Burbank, invisible to the glamorous people who swept past me. It was there, on my hands and knees scrubbing a floor, that I glanced up at a television monitor in the lobby, and I saw her. My mother, Eleanor Vance, was at a charity gala, bathed in the soft glow of television lights. She was delivering a speech about compassion and social responsibility, her voice ringing with false sincerity. The Chiron at the bottom of the screen announced she had just donated $2 million to the cause. She was donating millions to save the world, while her own daughter, miles away, was debating whether a loaf of bread with the first spots of mold was still safe to eat. The image of her perfect, benevolent smile on that screen was the most profound humiliation I had ever endured. It wasn't just that they had cast me out, it was that they had forgotten me so completely. That winter, I nearly broke. One night, a torrential rainstorm swept through the city. I was soaked to the bone, shivering uncontrollably under the flimsy awning of a closed storefront, the cold seeping into my marrow. I was hungry, exhausted, and utterly alone. For the first time, I considered giving up, just letting go. That's when an old man appeared through the sheets of rain. He was broad-shouldered and weathered, with the unmistakable posture of a former military man. He was the owner of a small, gritty boxing gym next door. He didn't ask questions, didn't offer pity. He simply handed me an umbrella and a steaming styrofoam cup of soup from a nearby deli. "You look like a fighter," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "You just haven't found your war yet." His words and the simple, unconditional act of kindness shocked my system like a defibrillator. He saw a fighter where I saw only a victim. The next morning, I used my last $20 to buy a bus ticket and walked into a military recruitment office. If I couldn't have a family, I would have a unit. If I couldn't have love, I would have discipline. If the world was a war, I would become a warrior. The military gave me structure, purpose, and a way out. My intellect and a newly discovered, ferocious physical endurance got me noticed. A few years later, I found myself at the gates of Camp Peary, Virginia, known to its initiates as the Farm, the CIA's legendary training facility. The Farm was designed to break you down and rebuild you into an instrument. They strip you of everything: your name, your past, your weaknesses, your emotions. They teach you how to lie with a steady pulse, how to withstand brutal interrogation techniques, how to turn your body and mind into weapons. The training was a special kind of hell, but for me, it was also a sanctuary. I channeled my pain. During brutal hand-to-hand combat drills, my opponent's face became Julian's. During psychological endurance tests, when instructors screamed insults to break my will, I didn't hear them. I heard Eleanor's voice telling me I was a viper, a disappointment. My family had given me a lifetime of unauthorized training for this place. They had made my pain my greatest asset. I graduated at the top of my class. I learned how to disappear in a crowd, how to read a man's intentions in the flicker of his eyes. how to survive in a hostile city with nothing but the clothes on my back. I became a ghost, an operative, a tool of the United States government. But deep down, my motivation wasn't blind patriotism. It was survival. Every skill I acquired, every language I mastered, was another brick in the fortress I was building around my heart. They taught me how to feel nothing when necessary. It was the greatest gift and the most bitter curse they could have ever given me. And now, standing in the cold, damp wine cellar of the Vance estate, I finally understood my true inheritance. It wasn't stocks or real estate, or a name that opened doors. My inheritance was the scars, the resilience, the lethal silence I could deploy at will. My father had built an empire of steel and gunpowder. I had built myself out of ash and betrayal. I looked at my hands, no longer soft and manicured, but calloused and capable. I thought of theirs, my father's, signing contracts, my mother's, pulling on satin gloves, and I wondered whose weapons were more powerful. It was time to find out. Using the butterfly hair clip from the cellar, I picked the lock on a little used service door and slipped out into the pre-dawn quiet of Atherton. I stole a car from the long-term parking at a nearby country club and drove south, the miles creating a desperately needed buffer between me and that house. I found a cheap motel in San Jose, a place of peeling paint and transient shadows, and paid in cash. Alone in the musty room, the adrenaline began to fade, leaving behind a profound, soul-deep isolation. There was only one person on the planet I could turn to. From a burner phone I'd purchased at a gas station, I initiated an emergency contact protocol I had prayed I would never have to use. Through a complexly encrypted network, I sent a single coded word to a single recipient: compromised. The recipient was a man named Luca, codename Spectre. He was the senior case officer who had recruited me, a living legend within the CIA who had not only survived the Cold War but had thrived in the shadowy conflicts that followed. To most of the agency, he was a ghost. To me, he was the only person who had ever truly seen me. The burner phone vibrated exactly 10 minutes later. I answered, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Blake, situation report." Luca's voice came through, calm and steady, utterly devoid of panic. He sounded as if I were merely calling to report on the weather in Northern California. My own voice was shaky, but I forced it into the clipped, precise cadence of a field report. Drugged, detained, attempted termination. Suspects are my biological family. There was no hesitation on the other end. No flicker of disbelief, just a calm acceptance. "Understood," he said. "Sanctuary protocol is now active. Find a secure location and lay low. I'll handle the back end from here." He paused, and then his voice softened almost imperceptibly. "You are not alone." Those 4 words hit me harder than any physical blow. You are not alone. For 12 years, since the night I walked out of that house with a duffel bag, I had been utterly and completely alone. For the first time in a cheap motel room that smelled of stale cigarettes, that was no longer true. I had an ally. I had backup. My mind flooded with memories of Luca. He wasn't just the man who taught me how to plant a listening device or escape a pair of handcuffs with a paperclip. He was the man who sat with me in a sterile debriefing room after my first mission in Bogota, where I had witnessed horrors that still haunted my nightmares. He hadn't offered me empty platitudes or told me to toughen up. He had simply, quietly, brewed a cup of Earl Grey tea, the kind he remembered I liked, and set it in front of me. "The pain is part of the job, Blake," he had said, his gaze steady and knowing. How we carry it is what defines us. He taught me how to forge that pain into armor, instead of letting it become a cage. He saw the fire in me, the resilience born of my fractured past, and he believed it could be used for good. In the world of intelligence, paranoia is a survival instinct. You trust no one. Yet Luca trusted me, implicitly and absolutely. He didn't ask for proof or question my story. He knew me. He knew the integrity I had fought so hard to build from the wreckage of my childhood. His unwavering belief was a powerful antidote to the years of accusations and contempt I had endured. It was a lifeline, reminding me that a person's worth isn't determined by the family they were born into, but by the people who choose to stand with them. He was my chosen family. A secure message came through to the burner phone an hour later. Luca had set up a temporary new identity for me, a clean source of funds and a short, curated list of trusted assets on the West Coast. "This is your war, Blake," the message read. "But you will be armed. Use these resources wisely." I stared at the list. My training had given me the skills of a ghost, but this list gave the ghost teeth. The first name was Anya Sharma, a high-powered attorney in San Francisco, renowned for taking on and taking down massive corporations. I took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of that invisible support from thousands of miles away. It was a shield, a promise. I was no longer a victim cowering in the dark. I was a case officer with a mission. I picked up the phone. My counteroffensive had just begun. Anya Sharma's office was in a sleek high-rise in San Francisco's financial district, a world of glass and steel that felt a universe away from the shadows I inhabited. The view from her floor-to-ceiling windows was a stunning panorama of the bay, a backdrop of power and influence. Anya, a sharp, formidable woman of Indian descent, wore a tailored Tom Ford suit like a second skin. Her eyes were intelligent and piercing, and as I laid out the facts, the drugging, the cellar, the escape, they missed nothing. She didn't offer a word of pity or comfort. She listened with the intense focus of a predator. "They believe you're dead," she stated when I finished, her tone crisp and analytical. It wasn't a question. That gives us the element of surprise. And to be clear, Paige, we aren't suing for emotional distress. That's weak, and it's what they'd expect. We are going after them for felony fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and intentional infliction of harm. We will dismantle their reputation and attack the one thing they truly value, their money. Her cold, calculated professionalism was a balm to my own frayed nerves. This wasn't a family drama anymore. It was an operation. While Anya's team of hungry young paralegals began a deep dive into the Vance family's labyrinthine finances, the first crack in the facade appeared within 48 hours. They unearthed an older version of the Vance family trust, one that clearly listed me, Paige Blake, as a 1/3 beneficiary. Then they found the amendment. 6 months ago, my name had vanished. My entire share, a fortune that could have let me disappear and live comfortably for the rest of my life, had been quietly redistributed to my brother Julian. The amended document had been officially filed just 3 weeks before Vance Defense publicly announced a landmark $5 billion arms contract with a Middle Eastern nation notorious for its human rights violations. Anya slid a printed clause from the contract across her vast mahogany desk. I read the sterile corporate language. A key provision required the executive board of Vance Defense to be of complete and unquestionable stability, free from any potential or pending familial disputes that could compromise security or public image. She looked at me, her sharp eyes holding mine. "They didn't just disown you, Paige. They liquidated you. You were a potential to familial dispute that could have jeopardized the deal. They sold you for a contract." The words hung in the air, cold and heavy. I wasn't a daughter. I was a line-item liability that had been deleted to close a deal. While Anya attacked the financial front, I worked the forensic one. Luca's list led me to Rex Donovan, a gruff but brilliant former NTSB investigator who now worked as a private consultant. We met near the quiet, wooded road where my family had staged my disappearance. They had left my rental car crashed against a tree, a scene designed to look like I had panicked and fled after a single vehicle accident. Rex surveyed the scene with a practiced, cynical eye. He was a man who believed every accident had a story, and this one, he said, was pure fiction. "Airbag deployed pre-impact," he grunted, pointing at the sensor data he'd downloaded from the car's black box. "Someone triggered it remotely, amateur hour." He then held up a small vial containing a sample of the blood they had smeared on the steering wheel. "And this blood, it's not yours. I had the DNA run against a sample you provided. It's a complete mismatch. A John Doe from a medical supply company, probably." Their arrogance was insulting. They thought a crashed car and a fake bloodstain were enough to erase a CIA officer. They had no idea who or what they were dealing with. The final piece of the local puzzle came from a grainy security camera video from a 24-hour convenience store half a mile from the crash site. The footage was time-stamped just 7 minutes after the 911 call reporting the accident. A figure in a dark hoodie emerged from the woods, frantically looking around before scrambling into a black SUV that had been waiting with its lights off. As the figure turned to get in, the harsh fluorescent light from the store illuminated his face for a single, damning second. Julian, my brother. The family's golden boy, the perfect polished heir, was the on-the-ground operative. He was the one who had wiped down the car, planted the blood, and run away into the night. This betrayal, in its pathetic, cowardly execution, somehow hurt more than my mother's cold-blooded command. But the biggest shock was yet to come. Back in the stale air of my motel room, I used my secure credentials and a satellite link to access the CIA's internal servers. I just needed to pull my mission logs from Panama, my ironclad alibi. The screen flashed a result that made my blood run cold. Access denied, data not found. My entire operational file from that week, every check-in, every report had been scrubbed, wiped clean. My burner phone rang. It was Luca. For the very first time since I'd known him, I heard a trace of genuine tension in his voice. "Blake, we have a problem, a big one." That delete order didn't come from inside the agency. It was routed through a high-level server at Vance Defense, using a classified backdoor that almost no one knows exists. A cold dread settled in the pit of my stomach. This was impossible. "Your father isn't just an arms dealer," Luca continued, his voice grim and low. "He has reach, deep. This isn't a family matter anymore, Paige. This has just become a matter of national security." Luca's words, "a matter of national security," hit me like a physical blow. The news that my alibi had been scrubbed from CIA servers wasn't just a complication. It was a profound violation. The agency wasn't just my employer. It was my sanctuary, the only institution on Earth where I felt I belonged, where my skills were valued, where my past didn't matter. They had taken the one clean part of my life and smeared their filth all over it. They had reached with their dirty corporate hands into the heart of Langley and turned the Central Intelligence Agency into a tool to cover up a squalid family crime. The fury that ignited inside me was no longer a slow burn. It was a nuclear detonation. They had crossed every conceivable line. They didn't just want to kill me. They wanted to erase my very existence, to wipe out the years of service I had given to my country as if they had never happened. I stumbled into the cheap motel bathroom and stared at my reflection in the cracked mirror. But I didn't see my own face. I saw my father's, smug and bloated with power. I saw my mother's serene, sociopathic smile. I saw Julian's empty, cowardly eyes. They had taken everything from me, my family, my name, my past. And now my honor as an officer. The final tether snapped. The dam of restraint that had taken me years to build shattered into a million pieces. The time for defense was over. The time for survival was over. Now it was time to attack. My hands gripped the edges of the porcelain sink, my knuckles turning white. A vow formed in my mind, not of words, but of cold, hard steel. It was a promise forged in the fires of absolute betrayal. "You made me a weapon," I whispered to the reflection, my voice a low, dangerous rasp. "You taught me to hunt in the dark. You taught me to exploit weaknesses, to set traps, to wait for the perfect moment to strike. You made me this monster to serve your purposes." I leaned closer, my eyes locking onto the stranger in the mirror. And now this monster has come home. I pulled out the burner phone. My hands were perfectly steady now. The rage had coalesced into something far more dangerous: purpose. I dialed Luca. He answered on the first ring. "Blake." "Spectre, I need something," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "Something off the books." There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear him weighing the risks, the implications. "Go on, Blake." "I need the current identity and location of Marcus Thorne, former lead auditor for Vance Defense. The official record says he died in a car accident 5 years ago. I don't believe it." This was a massive ask. Using agency resources for a personal vendetta could land me in a federal prison. It was a line I had never dreamed of crossing. But they had dragged the agency into this. They had made it a matter of national security. Now I would use that to my advantage. Luca was silent for another moment. He understood. "I'll see what I can do," he said finally. "But be careful, Paige. The path you're on now, there's no coming back." "I know," I said. "I'm not planning on it." While I waited for Luca, I made another move, one that was arguably even riskier. Using a layered anonymizing protocol I'd learned at the farm, I sent an untraceable text message to a company phone belonging to a woman named Chloe Mercer. She was a mid-level archivist at Vance Defense. Her father, a brilliant engineer, had been a Vance employee who had died of a sudden heart attack years ago, shortly after being discredited for raising concerns about a missile guidance system. The message was simple, just one sentence, designed to plant a seed of doubt in fertile ground. "They lied about your father's death, and they're lying about a lot more. I know some of you listening might think this was reckless, a gamble I shouldn't have taken. But I have to ask you, when you've been pushed into a corner with nothing left to lose, wouldn't you take a chance? Wouldn't you roll the dice on the one person who might understand what it's like to have their family's honor destroyed by the same people?" I didn't know how she would react. She could report me. She could ignore it. But in an asymmetrical war against a giant, you don't win with brute force. You win by creating allies in the most unexpected of places. I had just lit a fuse deep in the heart of the Vance Empire. Now all I had to do was wait for it to burn. A few hours after my request, an encrypted message from Luca appeared on the burner phone. It was brief and to the point. "Thorne, alive, Alias in Bend, Oregon. Coordinates attached. Extreme caution advised. Subject is paranoid and armed. I didn't hesitate. I drove through the night, pushing the stolen car across the desolate highways of the West Coast. Bend, Oregon, a small town nestled in the shadow of the Cascade Mountains, was the perfect place for a dead man to hide. Following the coordinates, I found Marcus Thorne's cabin deep in the woods, isolated and defensive. A thin curl of smoke rising from the chimney was a sign of life, but also a sign of fortification. This was not a man who welcomed visitors. I couldn't make a direct approach. I spent hours observing the cabin from a distance, my field training taking over. I analyzed his routines, his patterns. He was a creature of habit, and one of those habits was carrying a small caliber handgun, holstered to his belt, even when just chopping firewood. I waited until he was outside, his back to the dense woods. I moved silently, approaching from his blind spot, and spoke from the tree line, my voice calm and low. "Marcus Thorne, I'm not with Vance." He spun around in an instant, the gun in his hand, and pointed at my chest before I could blink. "Who are you?" he rasped, his voice hoarse from disuse. I raised my hands slowly, showing they were empty. "My name is Paige Blake," I said, keeping my voice even. "I'm the daughter Sterling Vance tried to have killed last week." His eyes, narrowed with fear and suspicion, flickered. The fear didn't vanish, but a new emotion joined it, wary, desperate curiosity. He lowered the gun just an inch. "Get inside," he commanded. The air inside the small cabin was thick with the smell of stale coffee, wood smoke, and years of resentment. The walls were a chaotic collage, a shrine to his obsession. Financial charts, newspaper clippings of Vance Defense's triumphs, and scribbled paranoid notes were pinned everywhere. This wasn't a home, it was a command center for a one-man war. Marcus told me his story. As the lead auditor, he had stumbled upon a multi-hundred-million-dollar slush fund, used by the Vances to bribe foreign officials and cover up catastrophic weapons test failures. When he was preparing to blow the whistle, they had arranged a car accident. They killed an innocent man, a drifter, and planted my ID on the body, Marcus said, his voice trembling with a rage he'd been nursing for 5 years. They erased me. He had been living in this self-imposed prison ever since, haunted by the empire that had destroyed him. He was a ghost, just like me. "I can protect you," I said, my voice firm. "I can give you your life back, but I need your weapons." Marcus stared at me for a long time, his eyes searching mine for any hint of deception. Finally, he seemed to make a decision. He walked over to an old, heavy iron footlocker, unlocked it, and pulled out a small digital audio recorder. "I planted this in Sterling's private conference room the day before I died," he said, his hand shaking slightly as he held it out. "It's voice activated. It recorded everything." He pressed play. A voice, elegant and chillingly familiar, filled the small cabin. It was Eleanor. "The girl is the last loose end. Eliminate the liability. Everything will be buried." Then came Sterling's voice, discussing with his lawyers how to handle Julian's various legal troubles, including a recent arrest in Mexico, quietly and permanently. It was all there. The conspiracy, the motive, the utter lack of morality. It was the smoking gun. When I returned to my motel in San Jose, another piece of the puzzle was waiting. An encrypted email had arrived from an unknown address. The sender was Chloe Mercer. "I believe you," the message began. "My father dedicated his life to Vance Defense. When he discovered a fatal design flaw in a new missile system, they fired him and branded him a traitor. He died of a heart attack a few months later. My mother always said he died of a broken heart. I will help you. Tell me what you need. My gamble had paid off. I sent her a secure reply, asking for two things from the Vance legal archives: the sealed records of Julian's arrest in Mexico and the original unamended version of the Vance family trust document. An hour later, the files were in my inbox. I had it all: the trust fund fraud, the staged accident, Julian's criminal record, and the audio recording of my own death sentence being ordered. I looked at the mountain of evidence on my laptop screen. My allies were the ghosts of my family's creation: a disgraced auditor, a dead engineer's daughter, and me. Marcus had been right. It was time for the ghosts to speak. The San Mateo Superior Court was a theater of power, and on this day, it was sold out. The polished wooden benches were packed. Journalists, hungry for a scandal, were crammed into the press gallery, pens poised. Rival attorneys, smelling blood in the water, were scattered throughout the crowd. And of course, there were the members of Atherton High Society, a flock of vultures in designer clothes, all eager to witness the private drama of the seemingly perfect Vance family explode into public view. I sat beside Anya, a silent still point in the swirling vortex of my own making. Across the room, my family occupied the front row as if it were a royal box. They were a perfect portrait of untouchable wealth and arrogance. Eleanor was immaculate in a winter-white Chanel suit, her expression one of bored indignation, as if she were being forced to endure a terribly common civic duty. Sterling looked formidable and severe, the titan of industry wrongly bothered by a triviality. And Julian just looked bored, idly scrolling through his phone, a picture of privileged indifference. Their lead attorney, a slick corporate predator named Arthur Delacroix, radiated an oily confidence. They weren't just certain they would win. The possibility of losing hadn't even occurred to them. When Anya Sharma rose to speak, her presence calm and commanding, Delacroix immediately shot to his feet to cut her off. "Your Honor," he began with a contemptuous sneer, "this is a desperate and frankly pathetic attempt by a disgruntled, unstable daughter to extort money from her loving family. There is no case here, only a shakedown. We move for immediate dismissal." The judge, a woman in her late 60s named Judge Marion Shaw, was known for her sharp mind and no-nonsense demeanor. She peered at Delacroix over the top of her reading glasses, her expression unreadable. "Mr. Delacroix," she said, her voice quiet, but carrying the weight of absolute authority, "this is my courtroom. You will speak when I invite you to. For now, sit down. Let Ms. Sharma speak." Anya gave a slight nod of acknowledgement and turned to the large presentation screen behind her. The first shot was about to be fired. "Your Honor, the defense claims my client, Paige Blake, was involved in a single-car accident on the night of October 11th, after which she supposedly fled. However, we have here a partially declassified mission log from the Central Intelligence Agency. The document, heavily redacted but with key sections legible, filled the screen. This log proves that on that date, Officer Paige Blake was, in fact, conducting a sensitive national security operation for the U.S. government in Panama. A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. As if on cue, a side door opened and a stern-looking man in a dark, conservative suit entered. He approached the bench and, in a formal tone, identified himself as a representative from the CIA's Office of the Inspector General. He formally authenticated the document for the court. The atmosphere in the room shifted palpably. I watched my family. Delacroix looked flustered for the first time. his smug confidence faltering. Sterling's brow furrowed, his expression hardening from annoyance to concern. Eleanor remained impassive, a perfect marble statue of composure, but I saw her hand, adorned with a massive diamond, tighten on her expensive Hermes handbag. Anya let the moment hang in the air, allowing the implication to settle before delivering the second, more brutal blow. "And now, Your Honor," she said, her voice resonating with theatrical calm, "we would like to play a piece of audio for the court." She clicked a button on her laptop. A voice, clear and crisp, filled the silent courtroom. It was elegant, cultured, and utterly chilling. It was Eleanor's. "Put the hair clip in the glove box. It's a personal touch. No blood, no trauma. It will look like a minor accident. We'll say the girl panicked and ran." A collective gasp swept through the gallery. The journalists began scribbling furiously. I glanced at my mother. Her face, for the first time in my entire life, was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. Her perfect composure finally, violently cracked. Delacroix shot to his feet, his face red. "Objection, Your Honor, this recording is completely inadmissible. It was clearly obtained illegally." Judge Shaw's gavel came down with a sharp, definitive crack that silenced him. "Objection overruled, Counselor. As I'm sure you're aware, this is a preliminary hearing, not a jury trial. The court will hear it. Now, for the last time, sit down." Anya waited for the room to quiet again. She was a conductor orchestrating their public execution. "Your Honor," she said, her voice now ringing with power, "the prosecution would like to call its next witness to the stand, Mr. Marcus Thorne." The name meant nothing to most people in the room, but to my father it was a death knell. The main doors of the courtroom swung open. A man in a clean but dated suit, his face pale but determined, walked steadily down the aisle. It was Marcus. A seismic shockwave ripped through the room. The press gallery erupted in a flurry of activity. Sterling shot to his feet, his face draining of all color until it was as white as a sheet. "No," he stammered, his voice a strangled whisper. "It can't be." Marcus Thorne took the witness stand, was sworn in, and then turned his gaze directly to my father, who was still standing, frozen in disbelief. "Hello, Sterling," Marcus said, his voice clear and steady. "It's been a while." That was the moment the Vance Empire truly began to crumble. Over the next hour, Marcus methodically and calmly detailed everything: the slush fund, the bribery, the cover-ups of failed weapons tests. He recounted how Sterling Vance had personally ordered the faked car accident that was supposed to have killed him. He provided account numbers, dates, and names, weaving a tapestry of corruption so vast and intricate it left the courtroom breathless. By the time he finished, the room was in utter chaos. Delacroix was frantically trying to object, to discredit, to do anything, but it was like trying to patch a dam with chewing gum. The judge's gavel banged repeatedly, a desperate attempt to restore a semblance of order. When quiet finally returned, she looked directly at my family. Her eyes were chips of ice, devoid of any mercy or compassion. "Based on the overwhelming evidence presented in this hearing," she declared, her voice ringing with the finality of a death sentence, "this court finds sufficient cause to order an immediate criminal investigation into Sterling Vance, Eleanor Vance, and Julian Vance on charges including, but not limited to, felony fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder." She looked at each of them in turn, her gaze lingering for a moment on my mother's shattered, horrified expression. "This hearing is concluded." Her final gavel strike echoed through the silent courtroom like a gunshot. the sound that would forever mark the end of the long and fraudulent reign of the Vance dynasty. The fallout from the hearing was swift and brutal. The news spread like wildfire through the financial world. Vance defense stock plummeted, becoming worthless overnight. The Pentagon immediately suspended all existing contracts and launched a full-scale investigation. The media dubbed it the defense industry's Enron, a spectacular implosion of greed and corruption. From my anonymous hotel room, I watched the empire my father had built, on a foundation of lies and cruelty, turn to ash on the evening news. I had expected to feel a sense of triumph, of victory. Instead, there was just a vast, cold emptiness. I had won, but the price of winning was everything. I had 3 final loose ends to tie up. The first was Julian. I visited him at the federal prison where he was being held. He wore a standard-issue orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his now gaunt frame. The golden boy glow had been extinguished, leaving behind a hollow, pathetic shell. He looked up as I sat down opposite him, a thick pane of plexiglass between us. "Paige," he said, his voice a weak rasp through the speaker. "I'm sorry." I looked at him, not with hatred, but with a profound and weary pity. "No, you're not, Julian," I said, my voice steady and even. "You're not sorry for what you did. You're only sorry you got caught." I let the truth of that sit in the sterile air between us. "You never saw me as a sister. I was just an obstacle in your path. Another problem for Daddy to fix. Goodbye, Julian." I stood up and walked away without looking back, leaving him to the 25-year sentence he had earned, and to the hollow truth that he had authored his own destruction. My second visit was to my father. Sterling had suffered a mild stroke after the hearing and was now residing in a high-end long-term care facility overlooking the Pacific. I found him sitting in a wheelchair by a large window, staring out at the ocean, a king surveying his lost kingdom. He didn't turn or acknowledge me when I entered the room. His once commanding presence had shriveled into a fragile silence. On the table beside him, I placed the old Zippo lighter he had carried for years, its brass casing worn smooth. "You had a choice," I said softly, more to myself than to him. "You had a chance to be a father. You chose to be a CEO instead." I paused, waiting for a response that I knew would never come. "I hope it was worth it." He remained silent, his gaze fixed on the horizon. His silence was no longer a weapon of complicity. It was the empty, final silence of absolute defeat. I left, closing that chapter of my life for good. The most difficult confrontation was the last. Eleanor was under house arrest in the Atherton mansion, now a cold, empty mausoleum echoing with her failures. When she saw me, her eyes, once so cold and controlled, were wild with a frantic, cornered fury. "You!" she shrieked, her voice raw. "You've ruined everything. You were always a curse on this family." I looked at her, standing amidst the ruins of her perfect life, and I felt nothing but a distant, clinical detachment. "No, Mrs. Vance," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I'm not the curse. I am the consequence of your choices." I held her crazed gaze. "You taught me that, in this world, only the strong survive. You taught me that sentiment is a weakness, and that all that matters is winning." I gave her a small, cold smile. "And I learned the lesson well, so thank you for the education." I turned and walked out of the house for the last time, her screams of rage and denial fading behind me until they were nothing but a faint, pathetic echo. That night, I stood on the balcony of my hotel room, looking out at the glittering expanse of San Francisco. The war was over. I had won. I had justice. I had destroyed the people who tried to destroy me. But after all of it, a question lingered in the sudden, terrifying silence. Who was I now? I was no longer a Vance. I was no longer an active officer operating in the shadows. For the first time in my adult life, I was completely and utterly free. And that freedom was both exhilarating and terrifying. The question was no longer how to survive. It was how to live. 2 weeks after my final visit to Atherton, I submitted my resignation to the CIA. Luca handled everything quietly, ensuring my departure was clean and absolute. In our last meeting, a bittersweet farewell in a quiet Virginia diner, he slid a small envelope across the table. Inside was a new passport with a new name and a clean slate. "You've served this country honorably, Blake," he said, his eyes kind. "Now it's time to serve yourself." I thanked him, my mentor, my chosen family, the only father figure I had ever known. As I drove away from Langley for the last time, I felt as though I were shedding an old skin. The weight of being Paige Blake, CIA officer, and Paige Vance, unwanted daughter, finally lifted. I was no longer a spy. I was no longer a victim. I was just a woman, searching for a place to call home. I found home in the most unlikely of places, a small rustic cabin on the edge of a frozen lake in Maine. The winters here were long and unforgiving, but the profound silence of the snow-covered landscape was deeply healing. The question that had haunted me in San Francisco, how to live, began to find its answers here. I spent my days relearning how to be a person instead of a weapon. I read books, not for intelligence gathering, but for the beauty of the words. I rediscovered Thoreau and Emerson, their philosophies on nature and self-reliance, resonating with my own search for peace. I started a small indoor garden, learning the simple, grounding pleasure of feeling the soil under my fingernails. And one day, I drove to a local animal shelter and adopted a goofy, oversized golden retriever with sad eyes. I named him Gable, a quiet tribute to the only person in that cold Atherton house who had ever shown me a moment of pure kindness. A few months into my new life, a small package arrived from Luca. Inside was my father's old Zippo lighter. Tucked alongside it was a small handwritten note on thick cardstock. "Your legacy isn't what they left you," it read. "It's what you survived." I held the Zippo in my hand, its familiar weight a ghost from another life. For a moment, I was tempted to flick it open, to see the flame. Instead, I placed it inside an old wooden box and put it on the highest shelf of a closet. The past was a part of my story, but it would no longer define my future. My legacy would be written in the quiet, peaceful days to come, not in the fires I had walked through. Healing, I learned, is not a straight line. There were nights I still woke up with my heart pounding, the phantom feeling of a fight-or-flight response coursing through me. There were days when the silence of the cabin felt less like peace and more like crushing loneliness. But I kept returning to something the psychologist Viktor Frankl once wrote. When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. I couldn't change the betrayals, the cruelty, the years of feeling worthless. But I could change how I allowed them to affect my present. I learned to breathe through the moments of panic. I learned to sit with the loneliness until it passed. And I learned to forgive, not them, because what they did was unforgivable, but to forgive myself for carrying the weight of their sins for so long. This morning, I sat by the window with a hot cup of tea, watching the sun rise over the frozen lake. The sky bled into brilliant shades of pink and gold, painting the snow and ice with a breathtaking beauty. Gable was curled up at my feet, his soft, even breathing a comforting rhythm in the quiet room. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt a sense of peace, a complete and total peace. They had tried to erase my name, but I had found myself. They had tried to bury me, but they never knew that I was a seed. And here, in the quiet solitude of a Maine winter, I was finally beginning to bloom. My story has found its peace, but I know that for many of you listening, your own story is still unfolding. Maybe you've seen a reflection of your own family in mine, or felt the sting of being undervalued. If you have, please know this: you are not alone, and your worth is not determined by those who refuse to see it. If my journey has resonated with you, please subscribe to our channel. There are more stories like mine waiting to be told, stories of resilience, of finding strength in the broken places, and of building a new dawn, one sunrise at a time.